The 1800s in America. A time when women were subordinate to men.
A time when slavery was being questioned.
A time when suffragists and abolitionists were on the rise.
Ready to end these injustices in our country.
The 1800s. A time that will lead America in a new and better direction.
Without the leadership of one of these suffragists and abolitionists, the legacy of feminism and the end to slavery would have never occurred. A suffragist. An abolitionist. A leader with a silent legacy. Lucy Stone. On August 13, 1818, a mother in Massachusetts cried over the fact that she had given birth to a girl named Lucy Stone. However, she did not know at the time that this girl would go through so much so that future mothers would never cry over their daughters again. In Lucy Stone's daughter's words,
"No one then could foresee that the little girl just born was destined to make life less hard for all of the generations of little girls that were to follow."
Lucy Stone steered the minds of the American population towards the ideas of abolition and suffrage through her perseverance, dedication, and brilliant oratory skills. Along with her amazing speeches, her leadership of the American Women's Suffrage Association, and her development and organization of a feminist newspaper, the Women's Journal, Stone heavily influenced an idea that she strongly believed in. After her time, her legacy was continued by many people she influenced. Today, people unknowingly are following the beliefs of Lucy Stone, allowing her legacy to silently flourish in today's society.
Lucy Stone's life as a leader started very soon, as she became one of the first women to go to college. While she was at Oberlin College, she organized a women's debating society with Antoinette Brown Blackwell, which was unheard of at the time.
After college, Stone had decided her career to become the first female paid lecturer on the topic of women's rights and abolition, even though her family did not agree. Soon after, in 1848, the Massachusetts Anti-Slavery Society hired her to speak about abolition. Her talk centered on slave rights, but soon merged into women's rights as well. At some of these speeches, Stone was harassed by critics in ways such as being hit with objects or being drenched with water from a fire hose, but this didn't stop Stone from spreading her beliefs. She threw her shawl back on and kept going. Women and men who came from afar to listen to her were mesmerized by her voice and manner. People who attended not believing in rights for women left as supporters after listening to her speak. Criticism only improved her determination and made her stronger.
At one event, a man accused her of being a disappointed woman, and she seized the moment to admit she was, indeed, disappointed by a nation that prevented her from achieving full citizenship and equality. Thousands of people left from her lectures, captivated by her ideas and beliefs. Dozens, if not scores, of people joined the women's rights movement because of Lucy, including Susan B. Anthony, Julia Ward Howe, Frances Willard, and Clara Barton, to name only four. By the mid-1850s, she was one of the most famous women in America. Far better known at that time then were Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony.
Not only was Lucy Stone leading people to follow her beliefs through her mind-blowing speeches, she helped organize other speakers to follow in her footsteps and help America believe in gender equality.
Lucy Stone became one of the most famous figures in mid-19th century America. In addition to her lecturing career, she played the lead role in organizing several national women's rights conventions between 1850 and 1860, selecting the locations, finding speakers and entertainers, raising money for the events, and publicizing the meetings. The press and most Americans identified Lucy as the head of this young movement, aided as she was, of course, by many women who were also committed to the cause.
Being a feminist, Lucy Stone strongly discouraged the idea of getting married.
She gave a very short talk in 1850 at the first National Women's Rights Convention when she declared that she never wanted to be the relic of a husband. That was often, women were called that, and basically that meant you were inferior. And she denounced that, and apparently Susan B. Anthony read that comment and was very drawn to this idea that here was a woman really standing up for women's rights.
However, when she met Henry Brown Blackwell, her thoughts slowly changed. Blackwell strongly believed in Stone's ideas such as marriage of equals, and was willing to support her in her career. Stone only agreed to marry him on the conditions that she would get to keep her identity. After they were married, Stone and Blackwell created a protest against the laws of marriage.
A year later, Stone decided to not take on the Blackwell name and insisted on keeping her maiden name. She became the first woman to ever do such a thing. She also received a lot of criticism for doing so.
Keeping her own name brought much criticism, of course, and some inconvenience. She received many remonstrances from friends who thought she was making a mistake.
In 1857, Lucy Stone paused her life as a leader to raise her daughter Alice. After the Civil War, she returned back to fight for her rights. At this time, the Congress had created the 14th and 15th Amendments, which freed slaves and gave African Americans the right to vote.
The suffragists were divided into three parties in regard to the amendment. 1. Those who thought it was unwise to try to incorporate women's suffrage in it. 2. Those who thought that every effort should be made to include the women, but that if this proved impossible, the amendment ought nevertheless to pass. And 3. Those who thought that if it could not be widened to include the women, it ought to be defeated. Charles Sumner and many of the old guard of abolitionists belonged to the first group, Mrs. Stone and Mr. Blackwell to the second, and Mrs. Stanton and Miss Anthony to the third.
This resulted in Anthony and Stanton to form the National Woman Suffrage Association, or the NWSA. Lucy Stone, however, founded the American Woman Suffrage Association, or the AWSA.
In 1869, Lucy Stone decided to move to Boston. There, with the help of her family, friends, and supporters, she raised $10,000 to start a newspaper regarding women's issues, called the Women's Journal. Lucy Stone was the founder and editor of this newspaper. Her husband, Henry Blackwell, and her friend, Julia Ward Howe, assisted her in the process.
The last editorial for the Women's Journal done by Lucy Stone was 11 days before her death on October 18, 1893, at the age of 75. Even after her death, Stone continued to lead people in her beliefs as she was the first person to be cremated in New England.
Make the world better were her last coherent words to her daughter Alice, urging her to carry on her legacy.
Lucy Stone's legacy began even before she left this world. If she had not stepped up for what she believed in, the following generations of suffragists, women's activists, and abolitionists would have never been inspired to help finish what Stone started by creating the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. Her influential speeches convinced over thousands of people to continue fighting for what she believed in.
She drew Julia Ward Howe into the movement. Julia Ward Howe was the author of the Battle Hymn of the Republic, very, very wealthy Boston matron, and Lucy Stone gave a talk in Boston, and Julia Howe went to hear her very reluctantly and was mesmerized, absolutely mesmerized.
Once she passed away, her husband Henry Blackwell and her daughter Alice Stone Blackwell helped carry on what she started. In the issue of the Women's Journal just after Stone's passing, Henry wrote under the heading "She Leads Us Still,"
Dear friends of women's suffrage everywhere, let the loving, unselfish life of our departed friend and leader be to us faith, courage, and inspiration. In no way can we so cherish her memory as by promoting the cause that was to her more dear and sacred than any other.
Also in Alice Stone Blackwell's biography on her mother, she wrote,
In the beginning, the movement for women's rights seemed even more hopeless than the movement against slavery. Today, the flag that Lucy Stone raised and that her husband and daughter tried to keep flying floats on every breeze. Women are voting throughout most of the civilized world.
Today, women not only vote, but are in supreme government positions worldwide and are still carrying on Stone's legacy to fight in order to receive complete gender equality.
That both women and men are entitled to a range of protections and personal freedom.
Later on in the 1900s, women in the Lucy Stone League continued her legacy.
In 1921, a Lucy Stone League that started of women who wanted to keep their maiden names when they married. Today, women just do that, but there's this historical legacy in Lucy Stone.
Women who retain their maiden names today and push for equal rights for women echo Lucy Stone's decisions. However, these people don't realize that they are following in the footsteps of one of the first and main leaders of women's rights in the 19th century, Lucy Stone. In this way, her legacy carries on, but carries on silently in our world today.